Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to this Accessing Databases with FireDAC and Delphi Developer webinar. My name is Paweł Głowacki. I'm working for Embarcadero as Sales Consultant. And this is the last webinar in the series of why to upgrade to RADStudio Enterprise. So this is the webinar number 4. And today we are going to talk about the best database access technology that is available in RADStudio, in Delphi, and also in C++ Builder. So just to put it in a bigger context, what I'm going to demonstrate Delphi. In fact, I'm using the one of the last builds, beta builds of upcoming RADStudio 10.2 Tokyo, and I'm going during this webinar to show and discuss some of the upcoming new features that are in the FireDAC. So yeah, a few words about the RADStudio itself. Maybe even before these few words, a few logistics questions. So this webinar is recorded, so if you missed any of this part, it will be available shortly after this presentation on our Embarcadero YouTube channel, and there will be a link to this YouTube video on my community.embarcadero.com blog. Also, you are all on mute, but there is a question pane at the bottom of the GoTo webinar, so feel free to ask questions. So at the end of this presentation, I will try to answer those questions, and if I don't know the answer, I will try to contact you with somebody that has the answers for you. Okay, so back to the presentation. RADStudio is when we are talking about database access and using FireDAC, then we can really talk about applications created in for different platforms. It is currently we have 5 different platforms. In upcoming RADStudio 10.2 Tokyo release, we are going to have additional 5th platform, Linux platform. So you will be able to create database applications not only that are running on desktop like Windows 10 and Mac applications. Also, you can use FireDAC to build applications that runs on mobile, so on iOS or Android, but also this upcoming support for Linux is for building a server-side application. So services application that do not really have a graphical user interface, but are running on the server, and they are themselves accessing databases through FireDAC. So yeah, this is the functionality that I'm going to discuss today is part of the enterprise version of Delphi C++ Builder of RADStudio. So there is, when you install a professional version, then you still see FireDAC, but you have only a possibility to connect to local databases. So if you want to build a multi-tier client server services, then you need to have a full FireDAC. So the full FireDAC is installed as part of Enterprise and above, but it's also available as a plugin. So if you have a professional version of either of the products and you are only interested in doing FireDAC, then you can get a FireDAC add-on that will add this capability to RADStudio. So in this presentation, I'm using the full enterprise version of RADStudio 10.2 Tokyo. So again, this is the 4th of the webinars that were presented recently this quarter as part of the promotion, because this quarter we have a very aggressive promotions for those that want to upgrade to Architect and Enterprise versions of RADStudio. So in the first presentation, I was discussing support for building scalable architectures with a data snippet RAD server. So that's also technology that is only part of Enterprise. In the second webinar, we were talking about building multi-device applications with FireMonkey specifically for mobile, for iOS and Android. So that was the second webinar. And 2 weeks ago, we were talking about UML modeling and strengthening your architecture and code with UML design patterns and using UML. So now it's probably one of the most common reasons people are looking at enterprise editions is building database applications, and in RADStudio, FireDAC is the best option for connecting to databases. So FireDAC is not the only database access framework that is part of RADStudio, of Delphi or C++ Builder. In fact, there are 5 different frameworks, plus there are also third-party frameworks that you can get from third-party vendors. So just to put it in the context, historically, the oldest database access framework available in Delphi and C++ Builder is BDE, or Borland Database Engine. So that was the original database access and framework that was introduced in Delphi 1. So it stands for Borland Database Engine, and it was very innovative at its time. It's still available in the latest version of RADStudio, but it's not installed out of the box. If you have some legacy applications or you want to still access some really old databases, or you need to maintain a super old applications, you can download BDE separately and install it and have it in RADStudio. But that's not something I would definitely recommend. It's more for backward compatibility. There are also other frameworks, like for example Interbase Express. So this is a set of components for integrating your applications with Interbase or Firebird databases. So Interbase Express is great choice when you want to have access to some low-level Interbase functionality, great transaction handling, and also access to functionality that is proprietary or specific to Interbase. Newer database access framework that is available in Delphi, actually, I believe it was introduced somewhere in the Delphi 5 timeframe, is ADO, or ActiveX Data Object. So this is a Delphi component layer on top of the Microsoft ActiveX Data Object library. So this is available in Professional. So if you are on Professional, that could be an interesting choice to use. But still, it's an old technology, and it's not really actively developed by neither Embarcadero or Microsoft. Is also not really putting any new engineering work in this library. Just before FireDAC, before FireDAC was introduced to RADStudio, the best way to build database applications was with DB Express. So DB Express is still available if you go into the Data Explorer in RADStudio, and that's something we can actually go try right away. So I'm here in RADStudio. On my right-hand side, there is a Data Explorer. I can make it bigger, and you can see that still there are 2 types of database data sources. So there is a DB Express, so it's more for backwards compatibility. So if you have existing applications built with DB Express, you can still use them. But then there is a whole the big number of different databases that are supported by FireDAC, and that's what we are going to focus today. So among those different databases that we are supporting, and that's a nice thing about FireDAC, that it supports all most important enterprise and open source and commercial applications database platforms. So we also have support for Interbase and Interbase Lite. So these are the Interbase is the latest is the database that is produced by Embarcadero. There are different flavors of Interbase. In fact, what is new, maybe I can just show you very quickly. Last week, the latest version of Interbase has been introduced to the to the market. So that's an Interbase 2017 with some of the latest functionality and some improvements to performance, to many features. So you can actually see this is our community website that I hope that you are all visiting very frequently. And here is the information about the release of the latest version of Interbase. So Interbase is fully supported. It's available on all platforms, including Windows, Linux, Mac, Android, and also iOS, which is there is no icon here. So there are some new features like support for extended administration and performance monitoring across different databases, and some new SQL specific features. So data Interbase is available as both the standalone application, so the standalone SQL server, or you can also use it as an embedded database that you can put on your mobile devices. So you can build mobile application for Android or iOS with Delphi or C++ Builder, and you can embed an embedded version of Interbase. And then there are still two versions. There is an IB Lite and IB2 Go. One is free and one is commercial. So the one that is commercial also supports encryption, which is very important, especially when you deploy to embedded devices. So, but still there is also a free version of Interbase. When you install RAD-Studio, Delphi, or C++ Builder, you can choose, this is by default, to install Interbase Developer Edition, so you can play with it and you can work with it. So that's support for Interbase. Yeah, but among other databases, we have other databases supported, and we are doing a lot to make sure that all the new database versions are supported. So with every new release of RAD-Studio, Delphi, C++ Builder, there are latest versions of supported databases supported, but also new databases. So quite recently, FireDAC has received support for MongoDB, which is a NoSQL database. So all those databases that you see on this slide are actually regular SQL 92 relational database systems. But yeah, with Delphi, it's all about choices. So it's also support for MongoDB that I'm going to demonstrate later in this presentation. What's new for RAD-Studio in this release is support for MariaDB. It's not listed as a separate driver. It's a very highly compatible with MySQL. So now you can use MySQL to connect to MariaDB data sources. So what is FireDAC and why we think it's so cool and so performant, and why this is one of the main reasons developers are moving to FireDAC? So first of all, it's high performance, it's easy to use, and provide connectivity to all major databases. It has been designed originally as a replacement for the Borland database engine. So that is why it is highly compatible and very similar to BD in terms of its programming interface. So if you are familiar with building applications with the BDE using components like dbgrid, tdata source, or table, then there are FireDAC equivalents to these components. And also, as part of the installation of RAD-Studio, you will get a refined command line utility. So that is a tool to migrate existing source code of Delphi applications that either using BDE or DB Express, and to move to FireDAC. Because of the high compatibility between the BDE and the FireDAC, the conversion basically is just about changing the types of components. So wherever there is a T-table component, it will be replaced with the reference to the FD table, and so on. So different FireDAC components have names starting from TFD something. So that's how this tool works, and also it updates the names of the units that are in the users clauses of your source file of your projects that you are migrating. So that's a very good thing. So for those that are familiar with the BDE programming with FireDAC will be very comfortable. So also some of the original design objectives of FireDAC was to support all major databases from the same code base. Even though there are differences in different SQL databases on the market in terms of the SQL syntax, but FireDAC is doing also some SQL preprocessing, so it's really possible to create one compiled executable that with no changes, without the need to recompilation, can work with different databases. Also, nice thing about the FireDAC is that it comes with source code. So the FireDAC itself is implemented in Delphi in Object Pascal language. So the source code of FireDAC framework is provided as part of the installation of Grad Studio. Also, there are some extensive sample programs and demo programs installed, so you can very quickly understand all different features of FireDAC. Another nice thing about FireDAC is that it is the deployment of FireDAC applications is very easy. So there is no need to deploy FireDAC drivers. The only thing that you need to have is a database client library from a given database vendor that you want to connect, if in case you connect remotely. But otherwise, everything is compiled into the executable, into the resulting application. So that's different. For example, if you are familiar with deploying BDE on every machine that were using the applications, Delphi applications, you had to have a BDE client installed, which was kind of difficult for administration and installation. FireDAC applications are just standalone. You just deploy application and it just works. So it will be very difficult in just this short presentation to cover all different flavors of FireDAC and all of its features, because it's a very rich database access framework. In fact, if you want to know a little bit more about FireDAC, last year we were doing something called FireDAC skill sprints. So on YouTube, if you search for FireDAC skill sprints, you will find a series of YouTube episodes with corresponding source code that is going deeper into different aspects of FireDAC, different selected features like working with local SQL, working with cached updates, working with RIDML, and so on. So that's a very interesting from the programming perspective. It's very effective, and you can do different things here very easily. So let's focus on some of the new things and some of the things that were added recently. So one of the things that is interesting probably interesting for all Delphi developers and all C++ Builder developers here is working with NoSQL databases. So that's really a different world. So I'm assuming that if you are on this webinar, you've probably been using Delphi for quite some time, or C++ Builder, or even if you are new to those tools, you might be using or be familiar with doing SQL or structured query language. But recently there is more and more shift towards NoSQL, JSON-oriented or other databases that are not necessarily using SQL as their main language. In fact, SQL is a very rich language, and the contemporary relational database management systems tend to be very, very complex pieces of software. And from the observations that many applications do not need the full power of a SQL language. They just typically want to be able to store some data, to retrieve some data, to find some data by index, or delete some data. There are alternative ways of storing data that are typically faster than regular SQL databases, and MongoDB is probably the most popular open source NoSQL database, and FireDAC has a deep integration, and Delphi with MongoDB. So part of this is also visible in the support for JSON processing inside of the RADStudio, Delphi, and C++ Builder runtime library. So in the system.json, you will find types that are specific to JSON, but also MongoDB extends JSON to some additional types. It's called not JSON, but BSON, or for binary JSON. So support for this extended JSON is also part of RADStudio, so you can have full access to the functionality of MongoDB if you like. So some of the new things that are going to be introduced to RADStudio. So just next week on Monday, there is an official RADStudio 10.2 Tokyo launch webinar when the new version of RADStudio Delphi will be revealed. So what I'm using right now here in this presentation is one of the latest beta builds. So there are still some things that are already there. So the new feature for RADStudio 10.2 is support for MariaDB. So MariaDB is a database that is compatible with MySQL. It comes from the same source code. In fact, MySQL is an open source database. It has the Oracle is looking after MySQL, but original creators of MySQL felt like they want to move and put their ideas into a different branch, so they decided to fork MySQL open source code, and now they are moving and evolving the MariaDB database engine. So we are supporting the version 5.5 and later, so that's the current version is MariaDB version 10. So the FireDAC driver for MySQL in Tokyo release has been extended and modified, so it fully supports MySQL, but also MariaDB. Also, what is really cool, and is one of my favorite new features in upcoming version of RADStudio, is support for working with data sets at design time. So if you have the FD memtable component, you can use it not only to create data, but also you can work with data at design time. And I think that's something that is really interesting to see. So let's have a quick look how this could work. So I'm going to create a new VCL forms applications in Delphi. I'm going to save it as memtable1 or FD memtable1. Okay, and yeah, just memtable1. Okay, and that's so I'm going to put a FD memtable component on the form. So if I go to the default layout to see all the different components, you can see that FireDAC is a very rich technology. So there are components in different categories on a tool palette. So FireDAC has probably the most important component is FD connection, which represents the connection to the database, FD queries. But there is this special FD memtable component that I'm going to use. So for those that are familiar with the Delphi from before FireDAC, the component that is very similar to FDMEM table is tclient dataset. So this is in-memory dataset. So similarly, like client dataset, so FDMEM table is a FireDAC equivalent of the client dataset. So what is new to this component is actually the first thing that I can do is to define the structure of a dataset. So this mem table component can be used as a data store in a client server application. So when you have a server application and you download data from the server to client, you can put them into the FDMEM table and work on the FDMEM table locally. It has the property cached update, so it can be used to cache locally updates like inserts, deletes, edits, and then all the updates can be sent back to the server in one go. But yeah, let's have a look into this new functionality. I'm going to define in the fields editor, I'm going to create two fields. So I have some structure here. Before I can work with data, I need to have a metadata. So let's add just two fields, maybe an it field for some identification and some caption field. So that will be the caption field will be of type string, like this. So I have now two fields, it and caption. So that's a functionality that was already there in the previous versions. But what's new here in upcoming Tokyo is the possibility to work with data. So I can edit this data set at design time. I can add some data. I can add some data like I don't know what could be here. Maybe I can put different planets. I can have, for example, Earth as number one. I can have another planet, maybe Mars, and number two. And I can add another planet, maybe three. This could be an Venus, and I could work like this further and still do interesting things. So click on OK. And now inside of the form file, if I right click on a form file here, view as text, I can see that this data is stored, encoded as part of the mem table. So that's it's encoded binary, so I don't see the actual records, but at least I know where this data is. It's part of the application. But now I can just work with this data locally. I can put a data source component on the form connected to the data set. I can add a DB navigator component, maybe align it to the top. So that's a new quick edits I can do and align it to the top very quickly. And I can add a DB grid component to the form, align it to the client very quickly, and I can select both components, DB grid and the DB navigator, and connect them to the data source. So now very quickly I can create an application that is a database application with an ad hoc data set that is not even persisted on the file or in a database. In fact, I can just take this data that I have created and I can save them to the data set as in one of the supported formats, for example, as a JSON. So I can have a planets one, and that will be now stored as part of my application, and I can have a quickly look in the Explorer. So should see the planet JSON. So I can open this with some I can open it, for example, with Notepad. I don't see any more apps. So for example, Notepad. So that's my data set that has been serialized as JSON from inside of my mem table. So it didn't exist. I have created it at design time, and I can now work with it. So that's a very cool feature of FireDAC, of the new upcoming support for FireDAC that I can now do in-memory dataset. So yeah, there are also additional changes to upcoming RADStudio support in 10.2 Tokyo. So the T field. So these are actually changes that are not specific to FireDAC. They are just new to the database development in general, so applicable to other data access frameworks as well. So T field class that represents an individual field in a dataset has a new asGuid property, so you can read data from a database as string, as integer, but now you can also read asGuid if the underlying data is GUID. You can also use, if you have images in your database and you want to display images using a dbGrid or dbImage component, you can now also have support for JPEGs and PNG files inside of these file formats. So yeah, so that's it in terms of slides. So let me jump quickly back and show you some of the cool features of FireDAC. So I wanted to keep the slides quite minimal, so just to give you a feeling what this is doing. So first of all, let's have a look into the functionality of the Data Explorer. So the first thing you do when you start working with when you want to build a database application, typically you want to configure a database connection in a Data Explorer. So this could be done to a remote database or to the local database. So in fact, I have a different machine running in this IP address with Interbase installed, so I can connect to a remote machine. So that's something that is not available in the professional edition of RADStudio. It's only available in the enterprise to be able to connect to the database that is running remotely. So if you want to configure the connection, you can just right click on it and specify, and first, when you create it, you need to give it a name. So in this case, it's employee. And then you need to specify the database file location, username, password, and some different values that can be different for different databases. And from inside this, you can actually quickly see if the connection can be established to your database. So that's very useful. Also, for every database, you can get some information. So there is an info that is, you can see more information about both the database that you are connecting to, also on the platform, different drivers that are used to connect to the database. So the database that I have also configured here is the MariaDB. So I have locally installed MariaDB 10.1 database. So it has, yeah, we can go from the command prompt, but probably we don't need, because we have already our own data connection functionality. But as part of the installation of MariaDB, you will also get the HiDSQL. So that's the open source data management tool that you can use to connect to MariaDB. So I have connected here, and by default, in a default MariaDB installation, you will have an empty test database. So I have created a test one table with ID and name fields. So this is something we can see in our application. So here, from without even creating a database, we can preview all the tables that are available as visible as part of the connected database. We can refresh it. We can actually view data, so there are no data, but we can also add it from here. So I can add some hello, hello, and we can add another record and have 2 and hello world, and click on apply updates. And if I go to this, I can try to open this for previewing. So I should see probably some data here, or maybe not. But what is more important is that I can preview. It's the strange language that this is now here. So it will just show me some statistics. I'm Polish, so the Dutch language is not my native, but this is the installation of RAD Studio is Dutch. I'm speaking to you from our Embarcadero Amsterdam office. So this data can be accessed from inside of the application, and I can also see here, if I modify the connection, I can also see some information about the connection to the MariaDB. So you can see this is the DLL. So if you want to connect to the to MariaDB, first of all you need to install a 32-bit version of it, and you need to put on path this libmysql DLL. So instead of putting this on the path, I have copied it to the bin directory of RAD Studio, so it's on the path and can be loaded. So you can see here is the information about the server, and that's very useful because we can very quickly work with it. And also another very useful thing is that from inside of the connection editor you can generate some SQL statements as interactively. So I can, for example, do a select statement, select star from my test1 table, and it will give me the 2 records that I have created. So this could be even more complicated. I can create tables, remove tables, so that's very useful. So also, as part of the installation of FireDAC, there is something called FireDAC monitor. So it will be it's running. I can use this monitor to trace connectivity between my application and the database I'm using. So maybe let's have quickly build a simplistic, maybe this time multi-device application in Delphi. So I'm going to save it as my FireDAC app, FireDAC app 1, okay, and that will be my main form, uform main. And in fact, that's my FireDAC app 1. In fact, it's a good practice not to put database access components on the form, but typically what we do is to put them on a data module, so they can be it's better in terms of the architecture of your application. So I'm going to add another file, the data module file, and that's a natural location for putting any database access components. And I can take any of those connections, and if I want to quickly build an application, I can just drag the either the whole connection from a data explorer onto the form, or just a specific table that I'm interested in. So I like to do a scuba diving, and so there is one of the the databases that comes with a RAD Studio installation is called MustSQL, and it has data for the scuba shop with different parts. So let's have a look what this is. I can preview from inside of the SQL, from inside of this data explorer, also individual tables in a backend database. So that's cool because it works across the platform. I can quickly see, in this case, this is Interbase database, but in the same way, I could have seen the data coming from my SQL database, for example. So if I like these parts, I can very quickly take this and move it to the form, and automatically the RAD Studio will put a a connection component on the form, and also the query component already set up to query the given table that I have just dragged. And that's another nice thing about FireDAC, that at design time, if I double click on a query, I can preview it, so I can execute it, so I can see this is the data that my application could see. So I can verify that my select statement or any SQL code is correct. Here I can specify, if I have a parameterized query, the types and the direction of my parameters, and also options. So that's also very interesting functionality of FireDAC, the whole options system. So with the options system, we can fine-tune how the FireDAC works. So let me actually drop another query component on the form here. So if it's already, nice thing is that if I add a query or another data set, it will all, by default, it will hook into the first connection component on the form. So if I already have a connection component on the form and I have just drag employee table, it automatically connected the connection, and I can see if it's working okay. So this option system is, if I double click on the connection itself, the second tab is about info options, and in the options I can specify how the whole FireDAC works when connecting to the database through this connection. So in more generic scenario, I could have more FD connection components on the form, but it's more common to have just one. So these options that I can change here actually works for this particular connection, but also for all query and dataset components that are connected to it. So it is it's a cascading system. So if I change any of the default values inside of these options here, they will be automatically propagated to individual tables. So just to change something and to see this mechanism in work, I can specify the general fetching option and the row set size. So this is option for when we want to display data, for example, in a DB grid, then and the underlying database table has hundreds or thousands of records. We clearly don't want to try to download all the records from a database to the client application, but we just do it in packets. So we can specify the number of records that I want to get in just one operation. So by default it's 50, and if I go to any of the connected components and go into the options system, I can also see that this value is also set to 50. If I go and change this setting or any other setting at the level of the connection, for example to 40, and click on OK, and double click now on any of these two tables, so this table, and go to options. Now see its row set size is 40, and in the other connection table the row set size should be also 40. So this change has propagated, but so that's useful because at the level of the connection I can change how FireDAC works across all queries, but individually at the level of the individual data set I can override this change. So for example, I may further limit this to, for example, 30, and now this change will override the option that is actually coming from the master connection. So that's a very useful functionality. I can actually see this in a DFM file. So this is the connection has a 40 row set size 40. So on the parts table I have not changed anything, so it's still going to be 40, but on the level of the employee table I have modified the row set size to 30, so it is now stored as part of the DFM file. So that's a very powerful feature, possibility to work with that option system. Yeah, that's very cool. So let's have a look into other selected functionality of FireDAC. So I'm going to save this module. So one of the nice things is something called RIDML. So RIDML is a possibility to get a really a level of magnitude better performance when executing a number of SQL statements against the same database. So for example, I may want to update an index of a number of different records in the database on a database table. So instead of sending a lot of update or insert or delete statements, I can just group them in one operation and send them all together and get a much better performance. So here is an example of a code. So that's something you can do yourself. So first of all, I have an employee connection and the query component. So this query component is expecting so this query is just adding values to the test table, and there is a test table has a field 1 and field 2 columns, and this is parameterized query, so I need to provide values for field 1 and field 2 inside of the my application. So basically I need to make sure that this table really exists in a backend database. So I have the field 1 is of type integer, so that's an integer field, and there is another field 2 is a string field. So before I can do anything, I can execute this query, I need to make sure that this exists in an underlying database. So I can just double click on the employee connection, do the SQL script, and see if we have a select star from test. And I'm expecting it does not exist. So table unknown. So it does not exist. So I need to, and that's an actually good example how you can use the design time support for working with database. So I can very quickly interactively create a table test with just two fields. So this could be a field 1 that will be integer, and the field 2 would be for example varchar, I don't know, 50, and execute this statement, and it has finished without errors. So if I now execute select star from test, I should see that there is no row selected. So it's not table unknown, but this time it's no rows selected. So yeah, that's a good thing. So now my application should work. So yeah, this is a little demo that I wrote to see the performance difference in inserting data using an RIDML and just using a regular SQL. So this is my employee database. I can just run it, this application. And maybe first, before I run it, let's have a look what it is doing. So yeah, the first button is first it just calls the exec SQL. So that's the method of a connection object that you can use to exec arbitrary SQL. And there is a stopwatch component. So I want to measure time. So I'm starting the stopwatch, and at the end I'm doing a stopwatch, and I'm displaying the number of milliseconds it took to execute this statement. So I have a parameterized query, FD query. So in the loop, so there is a 10,000 records I want to insert, and in the loop I'm assigning then consecutive number and a string, and executing this statement 10,000 times. So let's have a look how fast it will, how much time it will take to execute. So that's my insert, and it took 1205 milliseconds, so a little bit more than 1 second to insert 10,000 records. And then we can compare the performance with the second approach. So again, we are just deleting all the records from the underlying database first, and then we do this differently. So before, so we can have a property on the params called array size. So I can specify that I want to make 10,000 inserts. So I prepare the array of parameters to be able to store 10,000 values. And then in the loop, I'm not executing this statement. In the loop, I'm just assigning values to be executed in one go. So notice here is an extension. It's not as integer, but as integers. And I'm specifying which parameter in the parameter list I want to access. So notice that here we have just two parameters to set, but now we have a two-dimensional array of parameters. So in one dimension we have just these two parameters, integer and string, but in the second dimension we have 10,000 elements. So in this loop we are assigning to individual elements in this second dimension the values. In just one operation we execute the query and we specify the number of inserts we want to send. So in more general situation, you could actually specify, for maybe execute this a number of times and specify offset. So in this case, it will be, if I have 10,000 records to be inserted, I could, for example, do it 4 times and insert 2,500 records at 4 times. So then I would specify that it's 200. I would need to call it 250 as a number of times, and then specify offset, so the index of the record to start inserting. So now I can just compare the two approaches and do the insert standard, and took now almost 1.5 seconds, and the RIDML is much faster. It takes only 1/5 of a second, and here now it's much more. So this can be very useful when you are looking for speed, and this technology is full of those possibilities. So the last thing I wanted to show you is the support for MongoDB, and MongoDB is a non-SQL database. So I have locally installed MongoDB. So before I can connect to it, I need to make sure that it is running. So I have here some demos, but what I really want to go into my C drive, and there is a program files, and I have MongoDB installed here, and this is a server version 3.4, and there is a bin directory, and there is a MongoD executable, so that is server. I need to run it. When I run it, the one thing that it expects to have is the directory in a C on a C drive called data, and a DB subdirectory there. So if it fails to find this directory, it will fail to run. So you need to just create this directory after you install MongoDB. So yeah, it's now listening on a port 27017 for incoming connection, and we can now connect to it. So I can have a test table that I have created. So if I try to see tables, I get this error, and that's not a surprise, because in the NoSQL databases there is no concept of a database table, no concept of a database view, or no concept of a stored procedure. So that's why you cannot really preview the data here in a traditional way, but you can use this to configure connection. So we have the port number, and we can at least test the connection. We can see if we can what is the version. So we have, this is our database, and we have loaded the driver, and we see that this is a server version 3.4.2. So that's the version that we are working with. And yeah, there are some sample data, sample applications that comes with the installation of RAD Studio that I have decided to use. So there is a Mongo dataset. I think that's the most spectacular data, because the support for MongoDB, there is an FD connection, but there is a dedicated FD Mongo query. So that's a different query. It's not a standard query that you have. So I can actually go and see Mongo FireDAC NoSQL. So there is a special category of components here, FireDAC NoSQL, that has just components for working with Mongo. So this Mongo query does not have a SQL statement, because there is no concept of a SQL in NoSQL. In MongoDB, the equivalent of a table is called collection. So you can specify the name of the collection in the collection name. So that's when you click on active, you should see this data even at design time. And also, this is all based on JSON. So if there is some nested JSON, it is visualized in a DB grid as a nested data set. So here I'm actually using restaurants data set, so I can actually go and see the MongoDB restaurants sample. I think that should work okay. So before I can do it, I need to download some JSON. So this is how this data set looks like. You can download it from this MongoDB website from Getting Started, and that's you see that's interesting in the NoSQL databases is that there is no metadata, so you don't create tables like I did a moment ago to create a test data with 2 columns. So different collections may have a different structure. So individual rows in the collection can have a different number of fields. But in this case, this is just a sample database with addresses and information about different restaurants in New York. There is the geographic location, the address, but also some grades. So if there were some visitors, they were able to give some scoring to this restaurant. So when you make your choice, you can use some of the recommendations from other people. So that's this is this JSON data set, and I have to actually call not MongoDB but Mongo import and specify this JSON. So first you need to download it locally. It is just a lot of JSON data, and that's the internal file format for MongoDB, and that's what we are working with in Delphi. So we can now just start previewing this data, and I can just open different restaurants, and this is just showing the location, and I can also fetch more restaurants, and there is a JSON query, which is, there is no SQL query language here. It's just JSON is a query itself language, so I can have all the Italian cuisines. But if I just remove this and fetch just all restaurants, you will see that it takes longer, and now I have not only Italian, but I have also other cuisines. So that's how you work with it, and you can see different scores and different sub data of this information. So that's very cool, and you can actually analyze this a little bit deeper, and you can see actually that there is really the implementation to work with in code. If you don't want to use VCL and DB grid, then you would typically use code like this, so you have a connection, you can specify the connection name and the collection name, and then you have a fluent builder like code that you can concatenate, so you can do a match. You specify the name of the cuisine and the address zip code, and you can sort by name and display data. So this is the same functionality, but now more from a command line. You can do a query and display just raw JSON that fulfills a certain criteria. So that's just the beginning of the journey, and I believe it's very interesting because we are so much used to relational database, and the world is not standing still and is moving more towards NoSQL databases, and the FireDAC has excellent support for working not only with relational databases but also with non-relational databases. So you can find more information about RAD Studio, upcoming new version of RAD Studio on DocWiki. So on Monday, you are invited all to see the launch webinar with product manager teams, team for Marco, Sarina will be there, and David Millington showing the latest version of RAD Studio. So I have already previewed some of those upcoming features, like support for FD memtable, design time working with data, or the new MariaDB database support. So yeah, it's now time for questions. Let me quickly go through the question pane. So let me very quickly see it. So the question is from the Alf Christopherson about if we need to deploy fdconnections.ini. So that's a good question. In fact, yes, you need. If you, for example, do what I have done here. So I have taken this FireDAC app and I have added the data module, and I added this connection through dragging it through the data source. So if I double click on this, I can see that there is a just connection definition name specified here. And if I go into the text property, in the connection, there is only the strings connection is just the connection. So my application does not have any specific information hard-coded about the the connection, like location of a connection. It is coming from the ini file. So the data explorer itself can be used to manage the ini file. So there is a global ini file that you can find in the installation directory of RAD Studio. So in the users directory, public, and then documents and Embarcadero Studio and FireDAC, there is a connection definition ini file, and this is an ini file that, yeah, it has all the information about the connection. So for example, in my case, where I have defined my MassSQL database, it has this entry and the actual information about how to connect to it. So if you want to deploy this application, you need to deploy the executable file, but also you need to deploy this ini file, and it has to have at least this particular entry. It does not need to have all those other entries, but you can just copy this file and delete everything except for this connection. So that when the application runs, it will look for this ini information, and that's a good thing, because in this way we don't hard code information about the database, like password, username, or the IP address. It can be just updated in the ini file manually. So thank you for a very good question. What about Firebird Direct IO? So that's a very good question. I have not discussed this, but that's a new feature that was introduced in upcoming Tokyo release. So yeah, so it's supported. So you can just use this to work. Question: how can I add MongoDB to Data Explorer list in 10.1? In fact, MongoDB is not new to RAD Studio Tokyo. If I'm not mistaken, it has the support for MongoDB has been added in RAD Studio 10.0 Seattle release. So it is available in now Tokyo release, the current Berlin release, and the previous Seattle release. So if you have a 10.1, which is Berlin release, you don't need to do anything. If you want to define MongoDB, you just right click here, do an add connection. You can specify the connection name, and you can put some information here. Actually, there is interesting information. When I was preparing for this webinar, I was looking into the MongoDB website, and they have something called Atlas, and Atlas is hosted MongoDB. So it's hosted mostly on the Amazon Web Services, but it's a pay-as-you-go implementation, and that's a very interesting option. So if you want, for example, to start working in the cloud, you don't want to have the MongoDB installed like myself locally. You can just sign up for the MongoDB and have it in the cloud. And then if you have it already connected in the cloud, then you can just instead of specifying in the connection property my local server, then you would specify the IP address of the server that you have received. So that's how you can work with MongoDB. Saving memtable to JSON. Okay, question about is there will be a setup rules for what should be serialized, so I can data only, not information about the data set. So yeah, that's a good question, but in fact, this JSON format is used by the FireDAC. So the FireDAC needs this information, and if you want to serialize JSON to some other formats, there's nothing that you can that stops you for doing this manually. So there are different I have actually prepared some demos here already. So you can see webinar FireDAC and some demos. There are some demos that comes with RAD Studio that demonstrates working with JSON. So they were introduced back in a Seattle release, and they are part now because that's where the MongoDB has been introduced. And these demos demonstrates how you can actually output JSON in different formats. You can have a beautify, you can minify JSON, you can do a writer code. So yeah, the outputting JSON in the way you like, it's very straightforward. You can actually look for my white paper about working with JSON in Seattle, and it goes with the details of different options for outputting JSON. So maybe outputting JSON from the custom JSON from the mem table is not what the mem table was designed for, but you can do it very easily in code. Zakładka data tab data explorer. So yeah, that's that I believe that was the question from Sławomir, that zakładka.tab. Is also Norwegian supported in new version? I'm not sure what is the question about. So we don't have the only localized version of RAD Studio. You can actually go here in the welcome page. We have a platforms and extension manager, and this is this is a Godzilla beta version, so I hope that it will work. There is an additional options, and in additional options you can see there is English supported, and there are also French, German, and Japanese language versions of RAD Studio. So these are the localized versions of the IDE. But internally, applications that you create with Delphi, with C++ Builder, they support Unicode. And also they can work with Unicode-enabled databases. So yeah, all languages are supported. So maybe the IDE itself is not localized, but the applications can work with arbitrary languages. Thank you for the question. Insert standard. Yeah, so that was my, yeah, that was probably relating to my demo, DML demo. That, yeah, the standard insert RIDML. So that's just my way of differentiating the two ways. Question: you always use TFD query. Is this recommended way, or should you still use FD table? Or when should we use FD table? So that's a good question, and in fact, there is hardly any difference between the query and the table. So yeah, everywhere that you want to, maybe the FireDAC is not, the FireMonk is not good because it's does not have a DB grid. So it's probably better to have a VCL forms application. So I can use yeah, any, I can use tables as well. So I can take an employee and go into the tool palette and look for the FD table component, and it works just very much like a select star from the underlying table. It does not have this design time editor, so it's not as flexible, but it's very useful. So you can it very much works like a T table from the BDE, and like in BDE you can connect it to also to the very big database tables, and it will not try to download all records. It will be clever in just getting those records that needs to be displayed in the user interface. So that was a question about the T-table. There is nothing wrong with a T-table. Some more questions. Let me quickly go. Why not use FireDAC Explorer for INI file editing? Yes, I can use it. So that was one thing I demonstrated was FireDAC Monitor. And there is a FireDAC Explorer that can be also used for working with the INI file. So you can see that all the information from the Data Explorer can be alternatively manipulated using the FireDAC Explorer, and you can conveniently export INI files and import INI files. So that's another way to work with. Questions. How many maximal records supported in MongoDB? I'm not so sure. You should refer to the documentation, but in fact, it's more about the size of JSON. So I think the maximal size of one collection in MongoDB is 16 megabytes, I think. But that's probably the limitation of the MongoDB. So there is no really a concept of the record in MongoDB. So it's more about the size of the whole table that is the limit in MongoDB. But I don't believe that FireDAC or Delphi imposes any additional limitations. So the limits are at the level of the MongoDB. How does local SQL work? So that's a good question, and yeah, this is a big topic. So I would probably it's a good moment that I can actually show you this. If you go to the YouTube and do a FireDAC skill sprints, and you want to know about the different things like a local SQL, out here is the whole episode that you can use to learn more about local SQL. In principle, local SQL basically works that you can have different data sets, maybe possibly not necessarily FireDAC, and they just represents data sets, and you can create a queries. So you can put a local SQL component. It has a data sets collection, so you need to add all those data sets to the collection, and then you can run queries using a regular query component against this local SQL. So maybe you have one table coming from a JSON file, another maybe from a SQL Server connection, another query coming from a interbase connection, and you still want to do a join. So that's a unique functionality. You can create a use local SQL to perform queries against tables coming or data sets, query results coming from different data sets from different databases. So that's a very powerful feature. I'm not going to go deeper here, but you can see yourself, and that's if you want to know more about specific things about FireDAC skill sprints is the way to go. Okay, I hope that I have answered this. Is live bindings used? Questions more like a comment. Let me go through the. I don't see actually more. Is FD table? No, it's not really some statements, not really a question. So I don't see more questions. And again, this presentation has been recorded, so I'm going to make it available after this webinar terminates. Okay, so again, just to wrap it up. So this was the last developer webinar in our series of why to upgrade to enterprise. And if you go very quickly to summarize, so there are different reasons why to upgrade to enterprise, and I believe you can contact your sales representative from Embarcadero to find out about the terms and the conditions of the current promotion to have a special discount when promoting upgrading to enterprise. And there are some things like FireDAC database access. So in enterprise version of with FireDAC add-on, you can communicate with remote databases. You can use data snap and RAD server, client server architectures. You can build multi-device mobile applications with FireMonkey, or use UML modeling and UML design patterns. And all those things you can find in the enterprise version of RAD Studio, Delphi, and C++ Builder. So yes, thank you very much for watching this FireDAC database access developer webinar, and I hope to see you next week on the presentation from the developer, from our team, product manager team, and that are going to do an official launch of RAD Studio 10.2 Tokyo. So this is a free webinar on Monday, 27th of March, and it's for different time zones, so you can pick the time zone that is convenient for you. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and have a great day, great evening, great morning. Bye-bye.